Rebecca May Johnson is an English academic with a PhD in literature. Welcome to my Capotavola. How do you feel right now sitting here at the head of the table?
I feel excited, but also nervous. It's a big responsibility to sit at the head of the table. It wasn't what I was used to growing up. As a child, my father sat at the head of the table. And although I will say that now that my parents have got older, he lets my mother sit at the, well, no, he doesn't let my mother sit at the head of the table. He has stepped down, and my mother more often sits at the head of the table, actually, which is interesting. I think it's hopeful that people change at many stages of their life, and that's interesting, I think.
And which is the reason of this switch?
I don't know, actually. I honestly don't know. Maybe he suddenly felt like it wasn't the right thing to do. I'm not sure. Maybe my feminism in my 20s infected them. I don't know. But it's nice. I think it's good. And she does the cooking, so maybe it's a mark of respect for the cook.
Maybe he changed this idea.
Yeah, I think that's possible. Yeah.
It would be great.
Never too old to change. I think that's good.
Do you consider yourself at the head of the table in your life today?
I feel very empowered that I was able to write the kind of book about food that I wanted to write. It's quite a strange book about food. So I did a PhD, as you mentioned, in German poetry about a feminist rewriting of the Odyssey. In this feminist rewriting, the poet places women's work at the center of her epic. In this case, that was the work of weaving. But when I was studying that, I began thinking about the work of cooking and how to think about the work of cooking as a kind of epic, a big intellectual endeavor, as well as something that we do every day. Anyway, so it took me quite a while to figure out how to write this book because I hadn't read anything like it before, really. No. And I was very fortunate to find a publisher, which, when you're writing something unusual, isn't always easy. And it's very exciting to me that readers have had such a warm response to the book. So I guess I feel at the head of the table in the sense that I've found how I like to write, and I feel like I can continue to do that work. And there's nothing more empowering in your life than finding the thing that makes you feel the most alive, intellectually alive, physically alive, and finding a way to do that. And I just love it. I love writing, and I love writing my unusual work. It gives me great joy.
It's unusual. Do you think that it's unusual?
I guess I was made to feel like it was unusual. Lots of publishers, when we sent out the book proposal, so with non-fiction you often sell on proposal first, they said, this sounds really interesting, but we can't publish it because no one will, booksellers won't understand it. People who work in bookshops won't get it. It's too risky. So I guess in that sense, I was made to feel like it was unusual because the market and publishers were nervous about it.
But you know, often publishers don't understand what people can do. We have a lot of stories, important, famous stories. No, you will not sell anything. And
exactly.
Exactly.
I had a point to prove.
So you are satisfied?
I am. I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled, and I couldn't be happier.
And that was the journey to get here.
It was a long journey. It took, I would say the book is the culmination of around 10 years of work. It's a collection of all the different practices I was involved in prior to its publication. So intellectual work, so doing a PhD. Whilst I was doing my PhD, I was also quite depressed. I was struggling. I was very anxious. And to make myself feel like I was doing something in my life, I started writing a recipe blog in 2011 when I was in the middle of my PhD.
But to fight the depression, or
yeah, I think I realized that some of the best thinking I was doing was in the kitchen, but I had no space to write about it. I hadn't made a space to write about it. I was, most of my work was doing this PhD at university. I had never written about food really before, and I wanted to make a space for myself, for my own voice, because the academic work is very impersonal. It's, you're not really allowed to write about your own life in your academic work, or I wasn't anyway in my PhD. So I made this space, a space of possibility, a blog, and I began documenting my work in the kitchen. And the thing is, once you make a space to write in, all sorts of things can happen in that space. You never know what kind of writing can come into that space. And so whilst I began documenting recipes, that's where I also began experimenting with writing. So I was experimenting with cooking, but then I began experimenting with the written form as well, and strange, playful ways of writing about food.
You know that often we write about this special space, this kitchen, no?
Yes.
The room about whom Virginia Woolf wrote,
yes.
No? Una stanza tutta per sé, no? And I understand very well what you were saying, because I had a depression like you, and for me the exit was the kitchen, because only in that room I found myself, no? In the silence of the movements of cooking, no? And I don't know why. I'm still trying to understand why.
It's very empowering when you're struggling to feel able to do things in the world. When you're feeling depressed, that's how it feels like. Sometimes you can't do things. Actually, when you're cooking, you're participating in these transformations of the ingredients. And so then for me as well, to then write about those transformations, they were small, but I did them every day. And so after a period of time, you see that even though you felt bad, you have accumulated all of this work, all of these transformations that you've participated in, and it makes you feel reconnected to yourself in an incredible way.
And that you can create something, you can still create something.
Exactly.
I understand.
It's not nothing. And sometimes if we don't slow down to document that work in the kitchen, it can pass by. And often people who cook regularly, often women who cook, diminish their own work. They say, oh, I just did this, I just made dinner, it was nothing. No. But actually, if you slow down and you document it, it's massive, and it's a whole lifetime's worth of knowledge and generations worth of knowledge, and it's a big deal.
Absolutely, I understand. Why is there still such a heavy expectation on women who write about food? I don't know. I remember that Nigeria Lawson tells a lot of times, she tells that when she started to write about food, she was a little bit, not upset, but she thought that it wasn't, I think, so important now, because her first book that now is it's
a classic.
A classic. And why do you think that there is this
lack of respect?
This feeling,
Yeah, I heard her talk about that too on a radio show, and how she said she had friends who were writers of literature, of novels, and they found out she had a book coming out, and they said, oh, you have a book coming out, her first book, and she said, oh no, it's not really anything, it's just a food book. And it's this tendency to reduce our work writing about the kitchen is very sad, and I think there's so many causes of it. Deeply rooted misogyny, and I think it's also to do with capitalism, to do with the fact that work carried out in the home is typically not paid or is low paid, and in our society what tends to be valued is things that are very high paid. So I guess the kind of cooking that tends to come in for a great deal of recognition is usually people with very big chef profiles or something where there's lots of money attached to it. So the thing is, I mean, I love the 70s feminists like Silvia Federici, who are demanding, you know, that we think very seriously about the labour in the kitchen. What if we want to go on strike? You know, what if that labour is withdrawn? We suddenly realise the power of that labour. You know, wages for housework. You know, this is still a really important thing to think about. I think the causes are manifold, but a mixture of capitalism and misogyny.
Yes, I agree with you. Capitalism and misogyny. I think. You mentioned learning the poetry of cooking. Mm-hmm. I find this thing marvelous. But can you explain what that means? Oh gosh.
I mean, I guess it means many things to many people. For me, the interplay of textures, of colours, of smells, the transformation of those things, the movement of those things, is very similar to the sort of transformation that can happen in the context of a poem. But I think recipes as texts are also very poetic because, they're very complicated texts actually, because in time they both refer to something that happened in the past because they're a documentation of someone's gesture, but they also inviting a future performance. But I also love, there's a very unusual book called Grapefruit by Yoko Ono that she published in the mid-20th century. And there's texts that are quite recipe-like in that, but they're also sort of like poems. And it might say, make a tuna sandwich and then imagine 1,000 sunsets. And it's that speculative quality of the recipe that this reminds me of bringing new worlds into being, challenging us to imagine things that we haven't yet created, but we might go on to create. And I think poetry can do that. The incredible feminist, American feminist, Audre Lorde, wrote about poetry isn't a luxury, is not a luxury. It helps us change the way that we look at the world, and it helps us bring new worlds into being. And I think that's an interesting thing, an interesting thought to bring to recipes and dreaming of food that we will have in the future in a better world as well. And also, often people are cooking amazing and beautiful food in context of great oppression, but the deliciousness of that food is gesturing to something better, even in a context of oppression. So I said a lot of stuff then, I got a bit carried away. But she writes very beautifully in her memoir, Audre Lorde writes beautifully in her memoir, Zami, of food that her mother cooked when they were living under extreme racial oppression in America in the 30s, kind of gesturing to a better world for them. And I found that very inspiring.
Yes, to us in the future, perhaps. No? And what would you want on your right and left at the end of the table?
Totally honestly, I'd probably want to make the table a circle. Because
it's an option.
I'm uncomfortable with the hierarchy. But so maybe that would be my first act when I was head of the table, to make it circular.
Okay, but conversely, with whom would you never want to sit at the table?
Oh God. People who make me feel really bad, obviously.
Yes, I agree.
I think many people growing up as women have experienced men who look at you and don't see someone who has thoughts in their mind. Somebody who doesn't listen at all, or who attributes no value to your words. So I don't want that next to me at the table.
You met a lot of these people?
Fairly often. Oh. Not so much now. Not so much now. Oh. Not so much now.
Do you cook?
Do I cook? Mm. Oh, I do, yes, a lot.
But do you have a secret ingredient?
I like to respond to what's going on, what's in my life. I'm not very good at sticking to a plan, particularly. I think my secret ingredient is also knowing it's not always the right time to cook. In the last sort of few years, I've experienced periods of fatigue, and I have a partner who also loves to cook, and he will say, "You're tired, I'm cooking, you talk to our friends." And he lets me be the person that sits down and just chats whilst he does the cooking. And knowing that I don't always have to cook is a secret ingredient to loving cooking and it not becoming something that's too much.
Are you feminist?
Am I a feminist? Yes.
Yes. And which kind of feminist could be your baby?
Oh my gosh.
I don't know. I don't know.
I'm just reading a book at the moment, actually, about writers and artists in the 20th century, women who had children, and all of the different ways they found to do their work, to make their art in different circumstances. So I'm looking for those answers. I want a child to grow up seeing a mother who does what she is passionate about and doesn't repress all of her desires for the sake of the child. I also want the child to be well looked after, etc., of course. But I think it's good for a child to grow up seeing that their mother has a vocation that she loves. And actually thinking of the Italian writer Natalia Ginzburg, she wrote a book of essays called The Little Virtues. Mm-hmm. And in one of them she says, your child should not be your vocation. Because your child is separate to you and it has its own thing. You should have a vocation that you love that is not your child. And so for her, that was also writing. And I found that very inspiring.
Yes, yes. It's difficult to do, but yes, it's very inspiring.
So I'm looking for all the answers. I'm reading. I'm trying to find out. And I'm very fortunate. I have a very supportive partner who wants me to write too.
Oh, and which is your relationship with your body?
Complicated.
Like everyone.
I don't know. I think pregnancy brings about a very interesting, different relationship to your body. You have to accept its mysteries to a significant extent. You can't try and control it too much, which is a challenge, I suppose. You have to accept what's happening and accept that you have to rest as well. And you can't just always keep doing things the same. I've had, as I mentioned, periods of fatigue before, and slowing down was useful because it gave me space to think. And actually, if you're always on the go, always doing things, you don't always have the space and the time to think. And so I'm interested in the kind of thinking I'll be able to do and the thinking I am doing through pregnancy and maybe afterwards, because it will be different, because the body dictates a certain temporality, I think. And when you feel fully fit, time is different.
Sure.
But yeah, I find clothes very useful for experimenting with the body. When I was in my 20s, I wrote about fashion, and the body is something we're always in an active dialogue with, constructing through clothes and in the way we think about it. And it's that relationship's never over. It's never static.
No, never static.
Yeah.
I agree. Quoting David Foster Wallace, no? Something fun you will never do again.
I don't know. I mean, I don't drink like I used to in my 20s. As I write about in the book, when I lived in Berlin, the rule was you had to drink everything in the whole house before you went to the nightclub, and there could be nothing left. And I felt pretty terrible. I'd wake up at 6 in the morning with my heart palpitating and sweating. Although usually, I mean, the great thing about nightlife in Berlin is that you can leave the house at 3 in the morning and stay out till 10 in the morning. So you can kind of dance through that. But I mean, I'd like to go to more raves. That's something I would like to do again, but I don't want to ever feel that hungover again.
No, not now.
Yeah.
Listen, do you have a woman you admire more?
Oh my gosh, there's lots of people I admire greatly.
One.
Huh?
One.
I find it hard to think about heroes. This year I've been reading a lot of writing by Annie Ernaux, who recently won the Nobel Prize. And I really admire her commitment to truth in her work and in her portrayal of women's lives. You know, details of abortions, when it was illegal, and how difficult that was, women's desire, the romantic affairs she had, the difficulty talking about class and growing up in a working class family. I really admire her commitment to truth in her work, and that's something that inspires me as a writer. Yeah.
Which is the book that you want to write?
Oh my gosh. Oh, well, I'm working on my next book, so that's the book I want to write.
And about?
It's about looking for fragments of utopia in mealtimes, in different eating scenarios. And whereas Small Fires, my first book, is more about cooking in the domestic space and cooking, my next book is more about the public space and eating and thinking about meals as a place where we can experiment with utopia and different politics. So yeah.
Does feminist kitchen or feminism in the kitchen exist for you?
It absolutely exists, yes.
What is for you?
Well, I think the first thing is that you've chosen to be there.
Yeah, sure.
I think in previous generations of women, there was the sense that they didn't have a choice to be in the kitchen. So there was a lack of consent and there was a lack of other options. So first of all, I would say consent to be in the kitchen. And for me, I mean, I wish there were more communal kitchens as well. I wish there was that labour could be shared in the way that we design our cities, in the way that we build houses. In my dream feminist scenario, there would be more collectivity in the kitchen as well. So in the private household, I would say consent. And also if you don't want to cook, maybe you have a partner or a friend who cooks, or you just don't cook, whatever. But in a kind of dream situation, I would say more availability for more options for collectivity and collective cooking. Yeah.
Rebecca, thank you for being at the head of the table at Capotavola with me.
Thanks for having me. It was a great pleasure.
Also for me.